So let's start this mini CPD with a definition of what flipped learning is. And at its heart, at its basic, flipped learning is about extending the classroom. It is about changing the role of delivery of knowledge and the role of the teacher within the classroom. So at its basis, you take the lecture element of a lesson, so explaining the work of a practitioner, out of the lessons, and you record it using PowerPoint or whatever it is to hand, and then set that as a homework activity for students to watch, and give them the tools with which to watch it as well. So tools to be able to write notes with, to be able to watch and critically analyse what they're learning. Then the students go back into the classroom having already learnt that knowledge. So then your job as the teacher is slightly different. It's adapted in the sense that first of all you're making sure that they have that knowledge and you're closing any gaps, and that you're also then focusing much more on the way in which that knowledge is assessed in creating the performance work, in creating the essay, or whatever it is that you've got to create. And for me, this is what first drew me to the idea of flipped learning. I was always finding the balance really hard to pitch between learning about theory, learning about work of practitioners, and application of that knowledge in a performance. Either I'd spend too much time talking and lecturing the students about the different practitioners, and they wouldn't have enough time to create a piece of theatre which had that quality of depth to it, or I'd spend too much time working on performance and students would create long performances but equally lacking in depth because they didn't have the theory of the knowledge of the practitioner to fall back on to help them create that performance. And so either way, we weren't quite succeeding in creating performance that had knowledge within it. And so that first drew me to the idea of flipped learning. Let's just have a little look at that traditional model, which has been described by some as being the sage from the stage, where the teacher's role is a more traditional form of teaching, where teachers knew all the information and therefore were the gatekeepers to the content which is delivered to the classroom. And then the student's role within that would be then the content consumer, because they spend most of their time listening, receiving that knowledge through lectures, and then having to provide the evidence of that learning in essays or other formats, often done at home by themselves or done in a reduced amount of time because you've spent a lot of time lecturing them in the first place. And it's important just to think about that timing of that lesson, the structure of that lesson. So within an hour or a time frame, you've got to fit in a starter, some sort of retrieval practice exercise from the last lesson. Then the learning phase, where you're introducing the new content, which can often be a lot longer than you appreciate at the very beginning when you're planning something. Then you've got the application phase, some sort of plenary, and then the homework, which more often than not, as I said before, is about assessing the amount of knowledge that the students can remember in that learning phase. So in flipped learning, that lecture time, that learning phase, becomes the homework delivered to the students via the video. And the essay they create, the method of assessment, becomes the focus of the lesson. So here we then have the two models against each other. So with the flipped learning model, the homework is the starting point to the lesson. Whereas in the traditional model, homework is the method of assessment to see how students have got on with their learning. Instead, with the flipped learning model, the homework comes first. It's the precursor, the prequel to the lesson. The students need to do the homework before they come into the lesson. They need to watch the lecture before it. And then the lesson then is structured around what they learned in their homework. So it becomes the starting point rather than the end point. And as such, the timing changes. And students spend more time working in the application phase, working on what they are being assessed on. And I know one of the great criticisms levelled at flipped learning is that you go from being the sage on the stage to being the guide from the side, which is all cool, groovy ways of saying things. But I reject that. I don't see that at all. You are still the stage on the stage as the teacher, because you are still delivering the knowledge. You are still in charge of that. You are still the gatekeeper of that. And in many respects, you don't deliver that any differently. You just deliver it to a camera, and then that is recorded. And the advantage of that is that that recording then exists forevermore, so that students can then return to it again and again and again. And so can you, as the teacher, return to that again and again and again. And you also deliver it without the problems that any behaviour issues might intervene, or any other issues that come across. And you can also work from a script, so that you make sure that you say everything you need to say in your lecture, rather than just relying on the situation at the time and what you can remember about it. So the structure of the lesson becomes very different. You start with the homework, and then the retrieval exercise becomes much more important, because the retrieval exercise is then establishing what they know and what they've learned from the homework. And then your job is much more important as well, because the focus of the retrieval exercise ensures that students can then make progress in the application phase. So that whole process of the checking of the learning, the retrieval exercise, I think has a greater value than it would have done previously in a more traditional model. And then, of course, you've got much more time to spend on the application phase. And, the criticism towards the idea of being the guide from the side, well, that I again reject that idea, because you are getting involved with the students. You are straight in there, working alongside them, working with them to improve the very thing that they are going to provide as evidence of their learning. And if that's the assessment, then that's the most important thing that they can do, because a lot of students can learn everything, but if they can't then evidence what they've learned, then who knows what has happened. So within those 20 minutes, a lot can be benefited and a lot can be improved. And I say 20 minutes because roughly within the hour lesson, once you remove the lecture, you've got about 20 minutes extra time, which doesn't sound much, but if you've got 5 hours in a fortnight of contact time, an extra 20 minutes every single one of those lessons is an extra hour working towards their final product, rather than keeping it to however much time you had originally. So what have they gained? The students, they certainly work more collaboratively with each other, because they're spending more time with each other in groups creating the performance. They work better together, whereas in the previous model they would spend a good 15-20 minutes sat on their own listening, taking notes. Now they're spending more time with each other, and as a result they're getting to know each other more, of what they are capable of doing, and using those abilities to better use. They're spending more time on mastering the conventions of drama and using them within their work, and the in-depth study of the units and objectives allows them to create a greater discussion and debate, and therefore kind of promote their higher order thinking skills. They get a much deeper level of understanding of what they're trying to achieve than they did before. Because we've taken out the learning phase of the lesson and put it into homework, they then have greater access to me as a teacher to be able to help them overcome misunderstandings and problems. Whereas in the traditional model, they would listen and ponder and be unsure about things, and that might not be evident until maybe the next lesson, the lesson afterwards. They have the opportunity to come in and ask me questions and spend more time with me to be able to help them overcome those problems. And I have more time observing them and doing formative assessment on them based on how they are applying that knowledge. And so I can intervene much quicker as well. Because they're spending more time on their work, they also become much more critical of their own work because they have time to do so. They've certainly mastered the terminology faster, they're engaged more. And so across the whole board, standards of their performance work have risen considerably. It's not just the students who have gained something either. I've gained a lot from those extra 20 minutes as well. I know the students a lot better because I spend a lot more time with them. And because I get to know them better, I know where they need to improve, and I know their strengths. And I'm better at helping to improve them and meet their needs. And as such, I can intervene sooner. I can preempt when to intervene with struggling students. And I can be more effective with that intervention as well. At Key Stage 3 level, which is the 11 to 14-year-old students, it's been fantastic because I can keep everyone engaged and motivated and taking part of the lesson. That lesson has really helped because the students only have an hour a fortnight of drama, and the less I can talk and the more drama they can make, the better. So if I talk to them over their homework about a piece of key terminology that they're going to use in their lesson, then they come back into their lesson ready to work. And so they're more engaged and more motivated to take part. At Key Stage 4 and 5, it's even better because it's given me the time to spend with the students on a one-to-one level to really help them improve their grades. And the students like it too. The students like it because they can watch the video when and where they feel best to learn. They can watch it again and again and again. They can watch it as many times as they like in order to understand. And remember, in a lesson, that can only happen once. Within a lesson context, if I say something and they're looking out the window, it's missed. Whereas within the video, they can watch it again and again and again. And they can review past material and lectures for revision. And in a sense then, that helps them create a level of empowerment to take ownership of their learning, which they didn't necessarily have before. Now, I know there's a lot of criticism levelled at flipped learning in the sense that you are leaving the learning up to the students to do. And I disagree with that. Sure, you need to have certain elements within the lesson that make sure that students have done certain things. So if they come in and they haven't done the homework, then they need to have access to a tablet, a computer to be able to watch the lecture so they can use that in their lesson. They also need to be made aware that every time they do that, they are taking time away from their practical work that their peers are using much more effectively than they are. And I also reject the idea that just because students are learning and watching at home, they are not necessarily learning. I don't really understand why that would be even a thing, because from my experience, students come in having learned that information, they come in with more notes than they do when they sit and they listen to me talk. Even if it's a 3 or 4 minute quick lecture about using pace of voice, like I do with Key Stage 3, they come in with a far greater understanding of use of voice than they would do if they stood and sat there and listened to me. So it really, I think, helps empower their learning and helps them take ownership of it and increases the engagement and the enjoyment. And I would suggest that you use it somehow within your lessons and within your curriculum. Even if you use it once a term, for the first year, that's 3 videos. And then next year you make another 3 videos and you combine them with the 3 videos you made the previous year, and that's 6 videos. If you did that once every half term, but after 2 years, you've got 12 videos which you can then return to again and again and again. And the important thing about that is that so can the students. You've got that bank of recorded lectures which you can review and the students can review and return to as part of their revision materials. So I wholeheartedly endorse the idea of flipped learning and recommend that you use it in your lessons. Thank you very much.